Hi, this is Les and Amy from the RevGenetics Podcast. You can listen to the podcast on YouTube and now on Spotify, where we do a deep dive on supplements and longevity studies.
And today we are looking into something really wild. We are exploring these tiny microscopic messengers in our bodies called peptides.
Right. We want to cut through all that anti-aging marketing hype you see at skincare stores. And just explain how these little molecules actually work as cheat codes for your cells.
Yeah, to really get this, we kind of have to change how we think about the communication happening inside us. I mean, when you hear the word peptide, you might just think of a protein.
Sure, like a protein powder or something.
Exactly. But proteins are huge. They are these massive, complicated machines that usually just get stuck wherever they're made. Peptides, on the other hand, are just tiny fragments.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because they are so small, they can easily move around. I like to think of them as the body's text messages. Like, if a big protein is the heavy factory equipment, a peptide is just a quick text message sent across the cellular network.
That is a perfect analogy. It travels over to another cell, connects to it, and delivers a very specific instruction like, hey, build more collagen, or please stop this cell from dying.
Stop dying. Yeah, that's a pretty important text to get. And the crazy part from the research is where the most critical anti-aging text messages are actually coming from. They're coming from our mitochondria.
Which totally flips the old biology textbooks upside down. We always learned that the mitochondria is just the powerhouse of the cell, right? Just a dumb generator making energy.
Right. It takes in food, makes energy, and that's it.
But they are so much more than that. They actually have their own separate DNA, and they do this thing called retrograde signaling. Basically, they constantly monitor the cell for stress, like temperature changes or damage. And when they sense trouble, they manufacture these tiny text messages called mitochondrial-derived peptides and shoot them out.
So it's like the factory floor of the mitochondria sending an SOS memo up to the CEO in the nucleus saying, hey, we need help down here.
Exactly. And this matters so much to you listening because as we age, those factory power plants get damaged. They become less efficient. So they stop sending out those vital SOS text messages. The CEO stops getting the memos.
And without those instructions, the cell just doesn't defend itself. It doesn't clean up damage, which leads to cell death and all those diseases we just associate with getting older. But wait, if drugs like metformin, which so many people take, already target these pathways, why are scientists so obsessed with the peptides themselves?
Well, because metformin is kind of a blunt instrument. It stresses the whole system to force those signals out. But giving the body the specific peptide is like just sending the text message directly. You bypass the need to stress the cell out in the first place.
Oh, wow. Okay, that makes sense. Which brings us to the very first one they ever discovered, right? This peptide called huminin.
Yes. Back in 2001, researchers were looking at the brain of a patient who has severe Alzheimer's. Most of the brain was completely destroyed by the disease, but there was this one area at the back of the brain that was perfectly clean, untouched.
It was being protected by a microscopic bouncer.
Exactly. And that bouncer was huminin. It physically acts like a molecular lock. When a cell gets super stressed, it normally tries to hit the self-destruct button. But huminin physically grabs the self-destruct proteins and stops them from working. It literally forces the cell to stay alive.
That's wild. And the animal studies on this are just crazy. The sources talk about the naked mole rat, which is this weird, hairless little underground rodent that basically doesn't age. It lives for 30 years and almost never gets cancer. And it turns out it has super high stable levels of humin in its whole life.
Right, whereas in normal humans, huminin levels just crash as we get older. Except for one group, researchers looked at the kids of centenarians, people who live past 100. And those kids naturally have way higher levels of huminin circulating in their blood compared to regular people.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Is this just a coincidence? Like, is it just a correlation, or does huminin actually cause a longer life?
The science strongly points to causation. When they gave this peptide to middle-aged mice, their health improved dramatically. Less fat, less inflammation, better memory. They even gave it to microscopic worms, and it actually extended their absolute lifespan.
Okay, so huminin protects the brain and extends life. But there's another text message from the mitochondria, right? One called MOTSC, which is all about physical energy.
Yeah, MOTSC is fascinating. It's known as an exercise mimetic. When you do really intense cardio, your muscles pump out MOTSC into your blood. It travels around and essentially forces your cells to take up blood sugar and burn fat.
So it's basically a hardcore workout in a syringe.
Pretty much. But there's a huge genetic twist here. About 5 to 10% of East Asian populations have a tiny genetic typo in their DNA. It creates a broken version of this MOTSC text message.
A typo in the text. So what does that mean for a regular person who has it?
Well, the text message drops. It doesn't work. Men with this broken text message have a massive 65% higher risk of getting type 2 diabetes. But, and this is crucial, only if they sit around all day.
So if they exercise, the physical activity uses different pathways to keep them healthy, basically bypassing the broken text message.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of how our behavior interacts with our genes.
We're able to bring you these science deep dives thanks to RevGenetics.
They have a long-term focus on evidence-based natural compounds for aging research, like their high-quality NMN and resveratrol.
Which is amazing because supporting your cellular health is exactly what keeps those vital text messages flowing.
So we've talked about the peptides our bodies make naturally, but what about the ones we can create in a lab to fix things?
Right, the synthetic ones. The sources spent a lot of time on this one called epitolon. And this targets something huge, the actual aging clock in our cells.
Yes, telomeres.
So to explain telomeres simply, think of your DNA like a master security tape recording on an old CCTV system. Every time your cell divides to make a new cell, it has to copy that tape. But the copy machine is flawed. It can't copy the very last few seconds of the tape.
Right, it always misses the end.
Exactly. So to protect the important footage, evolution stuck a bunch of blank tape at the very end. That blank tape is the telomere. Every time a cell divides, a piece of blank tape gets snipped off.
And eventually you run out of blank tape. This is a hard limit. Once a blank tape is gone, the cell just stops dividing and turns into this zombie-like state that causes inflammation.
But epilon acts like a technician that just splices new blank tape back onto the reel.
Exactly. It turns on an enzyme that actually rebuilds the ends of your DNA. In lab tests, human cells treated with epilon just kept dividing, completely ignoring that normal hard limit.
And it worked in animals too, right? Like the older mice lived way longer.
Yeah, the untreated mice lived about 24 months, but the ones given epitolon lived up to 34 months. That is a massive jump in lifespan.
Okay, but we also have to talk about the cosmetic and healing side of things, because a lot of people just want to feel better and, have nice skin. The sources bring up these localized repair peptides, like GHKQ.
GHKQ is incredible. It's essentially a transport vehicle for copper. Copper is vital for building collagen, but free copper floating around is actually toxic. So this peptide safely hugs the copper and delivers it right into your skin cells.
And our levels of this stuff just crash as we age. Like you have about 200 units when you're 20, but by age 60, it drops to just 80. And it doesn't just deliver copper, it actually controls about 31% of your entire genetic code.
It's an epigenetic reset button. It tells your skin to start rebuilding itself and stops inflammation.
Wow. And then there's BPC 157, which sounds even crazier. It's actually derived from human stomach acid.
Yeah, it's based on a protective protein found in gastric juices. And it is famous for supercharging the healing of tendons and ligaments by forcing the body to grow brand new blood vessels right into the injured area.
The pilot beta they mentioned was wild. Like 58% of elderly people with chronic knee pain got long-lasting relief from just one injection. But I have to ask the obvious question here. If these things are miracle healers, why isn't everyone just taking them right now?
Well, let's be real here. It's currently the Wild West. Forcing the body to grow new blood vessels is great for a torn knee, but what if you have a tiny hidden tumor? Tumors need new blood vessels to grow, so there's a real theoretical risk of feeding a cancer.
Yikes. So it's playing with fire if we don't fully map it out.
Exactly. These things don't have massive long-term human safety trials. In fact, BPC 157 is banned by the World Anti-Doping Agency.
And there's also the delivery problem, right? Like I see people selling peptide pills online all the time.
Oh, that is mostly a waste of money. Peptides are fragile little chains. When you swallow a pill, it hits your stomach acid, and your stomach acid literally acts like a paper shredder. It chops the text message into tiny, useless pieces before it ever gets to your bloodstream. Usually they have to be injected to actually work, which obviously makes them a lot harder for the average person to use.
Right. You can't just take a gummy and fix your telomeres. So to kind of sum all this up, we've looked at the peptides our mitochondria make, like huminin and MOTSC, and the ones we can manufacture like epitolon and GHKQ.
And what it really shows us is that aging isn't just rust on a car. It's an active failure of communication inside our bodies. The text messages get corrupted, or they just stop sending altogether.
And that leads me to this final thought for you to chew on. We treat all the diseases of aging like heart disease or bad joints, like isolated hardware failures. Your knee goes bad, you get a new knee.
Right. Just swap the parts out.
But what if aging isn't a hardware problem at all? What if your body's hardware is totally fine, but it's just running on glitchy software? As we learn to read and write these tiny text messages, we might eventually just send a software update to our cells, curing the underlying condition of aging itself. It's just incredible to think about what your cells are whispering to each other right now.
It really is the future of medicine.
We hope you enjoyed today's podcast on the latest published science.
Thank you for listening to the RevGenetics Podcast.
RevGenetics.com for the best longevity supplements on Earth.